and welcome to The Blockchain and Us, where pioneers and thought leaders talk about their journey in blockchain technology, crypto assets, and the token economy. And I'm your host, Manuel Staggers. This episode is supported by 21 Lectures. 21 Lectures' mission is to bring more developers to the Bitcoin ecosystem with in-person courses. Lectured by world-renowned Bitcoin and Lightning developers, courses teach participants the fundamentals to work with blockchain technologies. To learn more, visit 21lectures.com. My guest today is Preethi Kasireddy. Preethi is the founder and CEO of TruStory, a platform for users to discover and validate claims that people make online, whether in a blog post, white paper website, or social media post. Before founding TruStory, Preethi was a software engineer at Coinbase, partner at Andreessen Horowitz, and an investment banking analyst at Goldman Sachs. Preethi is a self-taught software engineer who loves educating the world about blockchain and cryptocurrencies. And now, to the conversation with Preethi Kasireddy. Hi, Preethi, and many thanks for taking time today.
I'm excited to be on.
Let's jump right in with your current company, TruStory. Can you describe what TruStory is all about?
Sure. So TruStory, it's simple. We're building a social network where experts figure out whether something is true or not. Mm-hmm. And basically, we're really tackling the misinformation problem on the web today. I don't think I have to explain that problem because it's becoming more and more obvious to many people who browse the web that the information that you see online is, some of it can be trustworthy, but a lot of it is not trustworthy. Really, the internet gave people the freedom to do a lot. It gave them a freedom to connect and speak and to broadcast. But at the same time, they can do a lot of bad things as well. And you've kind of seen that happen over the last several years over and over again. And I just think that like in this day and age, we can't really live in a world where at TruStory, what we believe is like, don't trust, verify. Because there's too much misinformation out there. There's a lot of one-sided truths. It's a lot of false narratives. And there's really no way to get to the other side of the coin. And sometimes things are presented in extremes when things are always usually somewhere in the middle. And so what TruStory does is really provides a platform where claims can be debated so that you can hear all sides of the argument and decide for yourself what you want to believe, rather than just seeing one-sided truths that you see on Twitter or Reddit or whatever other platforms that exist. Mm-hmm. So the way we do the validation is we crowdsource it. So we have a small set of people in the early days, and that those people will grow and grow over time. But we've kind of trained these people on how to not only find claims, but also how to validate them, how to find evidence supporting or refuting it, and how to just be an open-minded person so that like when a claim comes in, we're tackling the claim and we're not tackling it from an identity perspective, but we're tackling it from like, okay, how accurate or inaccurate is this claim? And everyone is incentivized to do this. So there's a reputation system at play, and we're all collectively trying to figure out like what we want to believe together. And I think this is one of the biggest problems on the internet. I get frustrated day in and day out that people can just go online and say stuff without any consequences. And then God forbid someone points them out and they spin the story around and try to almost support their own narrative. And it's just sickening at this point. And we're just trying to build a social network where that's the default is that everything gets verified.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. You mentioned some of the mechanisms already a little bit, and I'd like to get into this a little bit later. But first, I'd like to speak a little more about, the truth and the media for a second. I mean, you mentioned that it's become a problem and it's quite obvious, but why do you think it really happened that, everything became so complicated with the truth on the internet?
I think it's just messed up incentives. In the end, whether journalists and the media is out to do harm, or it's just or it's a result of poor incentives. I think that's debatable. I think it might be a little bit of both. Like, I don't think journalists are necessarily out there to like harm people, but I think the incentives are messed up, where that is the behavior it produces in the end. Even though they're not intentionally trying to necessarily harm people, like the incentives make them trend in that direction. And so because of how competitive it is in the market for getting your information to be seen, etc., like you have to say stuff in the most, like, you have to spin a story, you have to catch attention, you have to make headlines, and to do all that, sometimes you have to spin the truth. And that is kind of what journalists are incentivized to do. And I get it, but I don't think it's good for humanity. I don't think it's good that people are basically sucked into these stories every day. And every day just basically feels like a new drama show. Like, it's just like, did you see this happen? Like, this world changing thing. It's just like, it's because something is spun so out of control and out of narrative that, like, I don't know, it's basically hijacked our minds to just think that this is how the world should work. And it's kind of becoming the norm, and we're just trying to change that. We're trying to change it and start with this very small area. We're starting with specifically information and crypto, and really tackling it where, like, it's not just about spinning stories, but it's about authentic information. People can make claims, and then people can debate claims, and we can have a dialogue about, like, what is the right thing that we want to believe, rather than just believing what you're told.
So in a sense, you crowdsource fact checking, right, of the information we find online.
Yeah, you can assume, you can say that.
Okay. And before you mentioned incentives, so how do you create incentives for people to do that kind of work of fact checking what they read online?
So everything in TruStory has skin in the game. So unlike Twitter, for example, where you can go and comment and troll without any consequences, like, everything you do, there's only a few actions in TruStory. You can back or challenge or vote, and any action requires you to put skin in the game. And so and the incentives work so that, like, the value of the reputation that you're earning on the platform is tied to the value of the content. And so if you do a poor job of curating and validating content for that particular category, then the value of your reputation in that category becomes more and more meaningless. But if you do collectively do a good job curating information for that category, then your reputation in that category is valuable. So people are intrinsically tied to the system in the sense that, like, everything has skin in the game, and they're intrinsically and economically motivated to try to produce the best outcome possible so that the reputation that they're earning is valuable in the real world. So those are the incentives, and I won't have time to go into the exact mechanics of how exactly this works, but that's kind of the crux of it. And I just think that I think it's prime time for that kind of primitive to exist on the web. I think we've had, one of the things that's been missing for a long time on the web is the ability to integrate, like, economic value into the transactions that we have and the interactions that we have day to day. And really, that's what we're doing at TruStory, where, like, there is an economic value to the interactions that you have, because and that allows you to have skin in the game. And so it's more difficult to do the type of stuff that people do on the internet today, where they can spread misinformation without any consequences.
Okay. I mean, I read somewhere that you said, we believe votes on TruStory will mean more than likes on Facebook or retweets on Twitter.
Yep.
So, and that's basically the reason is because likes on Facebook and retweets on Twitter have no digital assets tied to them.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
But why could nobody game the system that you're developing with TruStory?
Because the reputation is not fungible. So you can't just buy the reputation off a market. You have to earn it. And if you want to liquidate your reputation, then you can liquidate it, but then you lose your reputation. So it's not like you can go and purchase a bunch of reputation and use that to influence the outcomes. That reputation has to be earned over time, over multiple interactions in the system.
Mm-hmm. Before you said people want to read the truth, right? They want to be able to trust what they're reading. I mean, I often ride on a train, and so many people are engrossed in their, Twitter feed and Instagram feed and all that. So, I'm wondering how interested are they really in seeing something that's true or just something that's just entertainment?
So I think it's more than just about seeing the truth. It's about, like, TruStory, like, I think the sell is that we give you, like, things are always, we don't trust, we verify. But I think the big thing that people forget is that when you just read lazily on the web, like, the idea of thinking about the information that you're consuming has completely disappeared. Like, people are just consuming without thinking. And there's actually studies that show that, like, fake news is not spreading because of malicious per se behavior. It's spreading because, for example, things like digital literacy impact how much people are likely to believe something that's fake. And so, like, with TruStory, we're actually turning that around and breaking that role of passive consumption to active participation in the information that you consume. And sure, like, it's a brand new way of doing it. It's very different from how the current web works today. But I think if we want a better future, like, we have to try this approach. Otherwise, like, I just don't see a good ending to the way the current system works. Like, it's just like people just consume and consume and consume without ever thinking about the information they're consuming. And so they're swindled in so many different directions. But if you just take a minute to just, like, think about what you just consumed, which is what TruStory intrinsically makes you do, then I think it can lead to a much better world.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. What do you think will better incentives and better information on the internet do beyond just, more trust in the information that we read? Do you see any economic impacts or political or personal impacts there as well?
No, absolutely. Like, we have an early community of people, and we're purposely keeping the community small because we're pre-launch and we want just, like, a handful of people who are kind of our missionaries. And it's amazing to see them talk about the benefits that they've gotten by being a TruStory member or a community member. They've become better thinkers in life. And, like, that's kind of a big deal. Like, I've literally gotten messages saying, like, okay, like, you forced me to actually think about everything I consume and apply that same thing to everything I do at my day job and outside of TruStory as well. And I think, like, we keep hearing that. We keep hearing that from people who truly get what TruStory is about. And so if we can just take that and magnify it, I can't even fathom what the consequences could be, like, in a good way. Even myself, like, I am active. I actively go in and I actively work with the community to validate claims day in and day out, in our Slack channel and our community forum. And even myself, like, I find myself being a much more critical thinker. And just, like, I have a different, like, my model on how I consume information has completely changed because of TruStory. And I want other people to experience that, because once you experience it, like, it's just never the same anymore. And I am having a hard time explaining this in words, but I think, like, I'll just have to show it for people to experience it. Like, as soon as, like, that's what we're actively working to build. And, like, I know that this is working for me and it's working for the community members. So I'm positive that it's going to work for other people as well.
Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. This episode is supported by 21 Lectures. 21 Lectures' mission is to bring more developers to the Bitcoin ecosystem with in-person courses. Lectured by world-renowned Bitcoin and Lightning developers, courses teach participants the fundamentals to work with blockchain technologies. 21 Lectures covers cryptography, the structure of transactions and blocks and how they are chained, smart contract language, the Lightning protocol, as well as software and toolkits to develop on top of the blockchain and Lightning. To learn more, visit 21lectures.com.
I know that this is working for me and it's working for the community members, so I'm positive that it's going to work for other people as well.
Interesting. Do you have an example of that where you found yourself apply better critical thinking in your life?
Yeah, I think as sometimes humans, one of the behaviors I've noticed is once we want to think something, we don't want to change our mind. And even when sometimes the alternative view is there, we don't want to necessarily change our minds because we're so sucked up in our own beliefs. And one of the core values of TruStory is it's not about being right or wrong. We're not trying to attack your identity. We're just trying to get to the matter of the fact, right? And so we encourage our community members to change their minds if they find evidence that shows that their original thesis was actually wrong. And that's built into the ethos of the community. It's changing your mind is good. It's not bad. It's changing your mind does not equal you being wrong, doesn't mean you're bad. It's actually good, because you are seeking. You're open-minded. You're humble enough to change your mind to seek the better answer. A way that applied to me in day-to-day life is, okay, so I've been a runner my whole life, and I was very hesitant to ever believe people who told me that running and just a lot of cardio is just not good for you. And there's been studies and studies and studies that showed that too much cardio is bad. It's better for a woman to weight train. And I just I was very stubborn. I was unwilling to change my mind about it. And more recently though, I've kind of been okay, it's I don't know, the ethos that I've built into myself of through TruStory. Now I'm okay, I actually think that a lot of cardio is bad. I'm going to accept that. And I've started to cut down, and I've been mostly weight training now. And it's just it changed my whole frame of thinking of when I think something is right, it's right, versus when presented with new information, I'm willing to change my mind. And really that was honestly led through some of my early efforts with TruStory and the ethos and the culture that we're trying to build around how we consume and think about information.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the information was always there, just the willingness to accept it probably wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. I mean, you have a very interesting background, and let's talk a little bit about how you changed your mind developing your own career.
Sure. So I was an engineer in college, but I was not a software engineer. I was a systems engineer. And then I got recruited to work at Goldman Sachs while I was in college itself. So I didn't end up becoming an engineer full time. I just joined Goldman Sachs as an investment banker after college. Pretty quickly, I realized that I think like an engineer. I act like an engineer. I am not a finance person per se. I'm a problem solver. And so I was frankly pretty miserable being at Goldman Sachs just because it was just not it was not my thing. It was just not my thing. And I knew I had to get out of there. And so I was seeking out different ways to get out. And I was thinking of going back to school, tried a bunch of other things, and then ended up serendipitously ended up at Andreessen Horowitz 6 months later because through a cold email and many, many, many follow-up interviews, I somehow landed a job there. And it was it was an opportunity that I couldn't not take because obviously there's a number of VC in the Valley, and I just wanted to work with really smart people. So I joined, and I have no regrets about joining. I absolutely loved my experience there. I couldn't imagine not having that experience. It just like changed my life in a big way. But towards like 2 years of being there, I started to feel it again. I started to feel like, okay, like I'm not a finance person. I'm not a venture capitalist. I'm an engineer at heart. I love solving problems. And I just want to and seeing so many people come through the door who were entrepreneurs, who were coding, I was just like envious of the fact that they can do that. And I wanted to be able to go out and build something as well. Mm-hmm. So I started to teach myself how to code. And then I made the crazy decision of just quitting and pursuing it full time, because I just fell in love with it. I started coding, fell in love with it. I was like, you know what, like I'm going to quit. I'm just going to do this full time. I'll figure out what happens next. People thought it was pretty crazy because like I could have had a path towards like doing VC basically for the rest of my life and making really good money. But for me, money was never the issue. It was always like, what am I passionate about? What drives me? And at the time, like, God, I got so into programming. I taught myself everything within 6 months, and then got a full-time job at Coinbase as an engineer. And I was just so like obsessed with coding. So that was a time that like, you know, like I could have taken the happy path. And I decided not to, and kind of just worked my way up to becoming an engineer, and loved it. I love being an engineer. I'm so glad I did it. I can't imagine, like, I think the tools that you have as an engineer are amazing, and you just being able to understand the inner workings of a product is so cool. And I can't imagine not having that understanding. I think like everyone should at least get a basic understanding of like how code works, what it does. Even if you don't code day to day, I think it's important for everyone to at least understand it in this kind of technology oriented era.
Let me, sorry to interrupt there. I read also a post or, you know, an article that you wrote, how difficult it was for you to get into coding, because I think you got into it really deep. But if somebody says, I just want a basic understanding of how code works, not to write beautiful code, but just to understand how coding works. I mean, how do you think somebody should go about that?
I would say probably take some introduction, like build a basic website. Like that probably teaches you how, and then through that, you'll learn how HTML, CSS, and JavaScript works, how a server works. And then you'll also understand how the internet works. I actually wrote an article, Medium article, 4-series Medium article on how the web works. And so you'll I think even basically understanding how the web works is a good starting point. And so I actually wrote a series of articles on this if someone wants to take a look at them.
We'll link to those.
Yeah, so that understand how the web works, build a basic website. That's the starting point. If you want to go beyond that, you can start to understand how a server works. How does a server communicate with the client? If you want to go even beyond that, then you can start to understand this is like the basic stuff. And then you can start to understand like more specialized things, like how does a database work, or how do back-end programming languages differ from front-end programming languages? Like there's so many rabbit holes that you can really go into, but I'd say like at the very basic, everyone should understand how the web works and how to build a basic website.
Mm-hmm. And now with TruStory, you're an entrepreneur, or are you still heavily involved in coding?
I am an entrepreneur. Unfortunately, I was coding in the early days, but not anymore day to day.
Do you miss it?
I kind of, but I enjoy I think I still solve problems day in and day out. I enjoy thinking about product. I enjoy thinking about people. I enjoy thinking about the community. So I don't think to be honest, as a CEO, my time is best spent on not necessarily sitting there and coding, but building the company. And I enjoy that immensely. So I miss it, but I think I'm not unhappy because of it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. There's a time for everything, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
In your current role at TruStory, what are you learning at the moment?
God, everything. So one of the things is, as a founder, I think the most important skill set for any founder is ability to learn quickly. Because in the end, no one actually knows what they're doing. Like, not just founders, but I'm saying in the real world too.
Mm-hmm.
But in the founder's case, like that idea is even magnified 100x because the startup is all about unknowns. Like you have this vision, but the path to get there is completely undefined, and you just have to figure it out. You have to try different paths. You have to fail. You have to fall. You have to get up. And so for me, it's like there's basic learnings every day in and day out, hour in and hour out. And I don't think I can articulate it yet because like I'm so early in that journey. But once I'm a little bit further, I'll probably write something about this. But like you learn a lot. You learn how to, and I think one of the biggest things you learn is like how to be selfless, because yeah, it is your vision and your company in the end. But like to get there, like to build that vision, like you have to be selfless. You have to put your team and your users above what you want. It's not about what you want. It's about what your users want. And it's what about your employees want. And learning how to be selfless and prioritize what matters for the company, I think is the big thing for a founder.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Preethi, who are your role models?
I don't really believe in role. I think like I have role models for different things. I don't have a perfect role model. So like people like Chris Dixon are role models for me in the sense that he's a really good, like, I don't know, he's a great investor, he's a great guy. He has a good head on top of him. I enjoyed just his viewpoints. Mark Andreessen was a huge role model for me just because he's so brilliant, and I look up to him in a lot of ways when it comes to his ability to think about technology and markets and startups.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to more like leadership, I think Ben Horowitz is definitely a someone who I look up to a lot. I look up to Jeff Bezos a lot. I've heard he has a crazy personality, but I look up to him because he's one of the only CEOs that's basically survived through the .com bust. Somehow Amazon still to this day is alive despite all the crazy cycles that we've had in the market. I think that's amazing and something to look up to. Yeah, like, and honestly, like my role models change depending on where I am in life. Like if you asked me the same question 4 years ago, I would have probably named to you like 4 or 5 really deep programmers that I used to look up to.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that time in life, I was trying to, learn from them and kind of observe how they do stuff and how they got so good. And now a lot of my role models are CEOs. So when you ask me 5 years from now again, I'm not sure what that answer will be.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. What's on the horizon for you in the coming years?
Coming years, ship TruStory, continue to build a community around it, and honestly, like this is the only thing that's on my mind right now, TruStory.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, I'll have to see. I can't even think that far.
Okay, cool. This was great, Preethi. Many thanks for taking time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us today. More info on our guest and our sponsors is in the show notes of this episode and on the podcast website, theblockchainandus.com. To help people find this podcast, it's important that you download, subscribe, and give it a top rating and review on iTunes or on the podcast platform of your choice. I'm Manuel Staggers, and I thank you very much for listening.